Hello everyone, it's Ranger64, and welcome back to another League of Legends lore reading video. Today, we'll be reading another short story that has been posted in the League of Legends Universe website. Dead of Winter by Graham McNeill. Even from a distance, Sejuani could see the mammoth was dying. But, like everything in the Freljord, it fought to live with every fiber of its being. Half a dozen spears and twice that many arrows jutted from the colossal beast's matted hide. Its russet fur, stiff, frozen blood, but still wouldn't die. Its furious bellows shook the mountains, and Sejuani kept glancing to the lightning-wreathed summit, fearful of an avalanche. Something worse. Purple lightning flared beyond the mountains, silhouetting the peaks and turning them into serrated fangs ripped open the sky. She and her Winter's Claw hunters had stalked the mammoth for a week, driving it towards the shallow canyons of the foothills. Each time it broke through their ring of spears and axes to flee higher up the mountain's spine-shawled flanks. Of the 10 warriors she had set out with, only 7 now remain. 3 less mouths to feed. Sejuani hated having to think this way, because these were fine hunters, fearsome warriors. But Villemir, the seer, was predicting one of the harshest winters in the living memories, and the Winter's Claw's supply. Food were dwindling fast. The mountain herds of Elnuk they would usually raid had already been driven south to the lowlands by their Avarosan drovers, and the fish of the ice sea were locked below thick pack ice, hauled back on Bristol's reins, pausing to gather her thoughts. The giant Rex grunted and shook his head in annoyance. The smell of the mammoth's blood thick in his nostrils. The mounts of her hunters were wary at being this close to a mammoth, but Bristle eager for a fight. Easy there, she said, loosening the stiffened scarf from her mouth and feeling the cold on her skin like a slap in the face. This is not a fight for tusk, but spears. Good to know, even Iceborn can feel this saving cold, said a cloaked figure riding next to her. His voice was muffled by the furs wrapped around his face, and all Sejuani could see were bloodshot eyes. The rest of his face was hidden behind a leather mask, wrought in the shape of a roaring bear, its snout formed by thick overlapping knotwork. A low rumble built in Bristol's throat at the man's knees. So, Sejuani ran a hand towards the weary hair of his flanks to calm him. I feel it well enough, Urkath, Sejuani replied. I just don't gripe about it. Urkath nodded up the mountain and said, How much longer do you think our quarry will go before it bites? Some 300 years ahead of them, Mammoth trudged uphill through the snow. Its steps labored, and a trail of crimson stained the virgin whiteness of the landscape. It won't be long, said Sejuani. He's lost too much blood to reach the summit. He'll turn before the timberline. How do you know? Asked Urkath. I don't, admitted Sejuani. But I'm betting he thinks we won't follow him if he gets higher. Is he wrong? Any higher and we'll cross to the realm he stands. Even thinking of the Volibear and the earth sign flooded Sejuani's mouth with the taste of warm blood and the sensation of lightning in her eyes. Images flash in her mind. sharping bright and painfully real. Memories that weren't hers, sensations she hadn't felt, woven together as though she lived them only moments ago. Fangs and claws ripping flesh from the bone, elongated skulls with cold, blue fire burning in empty eye sockets, a pack of a living city reduced to blackened skeletons of stone and timber. Slaughtered corpses hung from the withered branches of death-nourished trees. "Your mother?" said Urkath. Sejuani tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come out, as though a more ancient primal part of her soul was looking out through her eyes, the part that once ran with the beasts. Palms bloody, skin raw and bare, caked in mud. Urkath reached out a hand for warmth. "Your mother?" he asked again, more urgent this time. Her hackles raised at his unwanted touch. Saliva filled her mouth as her lips pulled back, baring her teeth, ready to tear his throat out. Sejuani closed her fists on the spiked pommel of her saddle, hard. Pain cleared her head and wrenched her back present as she let out a shuddering breath. "We'll want to take that hand away," she said, her eyes flashing a tone icier than mountain winds. Eyes watchful, Urkath snatched his hand back and said, "Apologies, War Mother, but to enter the lands, lost ones, without their was a death sentence." A shadow bloated out the low sun before Sejuani could. A towering figure of a man wearing the hide horn helm favored by warriors of the Lokar. Coastal peninsula of Lokfar, one of the harshest, brutally cold regions of Freljord, and only those with fire in their blood could live there. Its warriors, typically ragey, lean, and stoic. Shedding blood alongside Olaf the Berserker for many years had taught Sejuani that he was none of those things. Even on foot, was easily the biggest Freljordian she had ever seen. The equal of the mounted Sejuani and Urkath in height. Some said Olaf's mother must have lain with a troll for him to grow so big, but they never said it to his face. Climbed into the teeth oncoming blizzard like a man stroll. His powerfully muscled body made thicker and broader by the furs and iron plates bound across his chest and arms. The braids of his beard were frozen into spikes of fury orange, and his pale eyes were alight with the prospect of potentially facing what lay at the top of the mountain. "A death sentence, you say?" said Olaf, striding past them. "Like the sound of that." The mammoth sank to its knees within spear's throw from the cliffside timberline. Its blood soaked the snow, and Sejuani almost felt sorry for the beast coming so close to the border between this world and the terrible things that dwelled in the storm-raking summit. She pushed thoughts of sentiments aside. An animal this size would feed the winter's claw for a week, surviving a day, an hour, even the span of a breath was a victory for Elior. Sejuani slid from Bristol's back as her hunters dropped to the snow, unstrapping long, thick-haft spears from their mounts. She reached over her shoulder and unlanced the thongs securing her mighty flail. Winter's wrath. Steeling herself from the pain, ripped its leather-wrapped shaft and swung it around her body, feeling deathly cold of the true ice secured end of chain. Pale radiance built behind the blue eyes of hers, and she exhaled a breath of aching cold. The flail was a weapon of great power, but it came with a cost. Glowing lines of shards, crystalline blue, formed under her skin, threading the veins of her forearm and reaching up to her corded bicep. Urkath drew a great longsword, its hilt worked from the jawbones of a rim-fanged wolf, and its blade sharp enough to cut stone. Olaf unsheathed his mighty axes, their blades glimmering with hoar frost. "My edges hunger," said Olaf, his teeth gritting in anticipation, blood-feckled lips where he chewed inside of his cheeks. "We do this right," said Sejuani. "Together, no heroics." Olaf grinned and nodded, his eyes glazing over and his skin mine already sinking into the blood mist of the berserker. Sejuani took a step forward to the mammoth, lifting the flail and letting the beast see the glimmering cold of its true ice. "Get up," she ordered. "You are a king of the Freljord. Do not die on your knees." Mammoth glared at her, and taking strength from her words, pushing itself to its feet, threw back its shaggy, tusked head and loosened its ferocious bray of defiance. Sound echoed over the mountains like the Forge God's legendary Carnix, a war horn whose blast could be heard all around the world. Sound shook the snow from the trees, eclipsing the storm raging the summit. The mammoth lowered its head and stamped its huge front legs, each as thick as the ironwood trees ringing the rocks at Orm. Its head swayed from side to side, displaying its jagged sword-like tusks, each capable of goring a warrior to death with a single blow. "We will give you a good death. You have my word," promised Sejuani. "A glorious death," grunted Olaf, the words forced out between bloody teeth, but Sejuani wasn't sure whose death he meant. Winter's Claw hunters spread out, weapons at the ready. Warriors with the spears flanked the mammoth left and right as Sejuani, Olaf, and Urkath stood before it, meeting its challenge head-on. With a bellow of rage, the mortally wounded beast charged. Its speed was ferocious, far faster than should have been possible. It churned the snow, throwing up great chunks of black rock and bloody ice. Sejuani and Urkath dove to the side, but Olaf leapt to meet the beast with a bellow to rival that of his foe. His axe struck the mammoth in the center of its head, but bit only a finger breadth before skidding from the thick bone of its skull. With a dismissive flick of its trunk, the mammoth tossed the berserker over its back. Olaf landed hard on the rocks behind, dangerously close to the sheer drop of the cliffs. He came to his feet with a delighted, tick smile. Sejuani rolled to her feet and swung Winter's Wrath in a wide two-handed sweep. The flail's true ice smashed into the mammoth's back knee. It flattered, stumbling, and the limb buckled beneath it. The beast crashed to the ground and skipped to a halt, trying to push its feet on the back leg. That wouldn't work. Sejuani's warriors closed in, ramming their spears into its flanks with the grim, pitiless precision of hunters who had done this many a times before. Thrust the blade, twist the shaft, draw to safe distance. Mammoth roared and surged upright as iron spearheads pierced its body, fresh blood staining the snow. A successful hunt had little to do with glory or honor. It was about exhausting the prey, wounding it, wearing it down until it couldn't fight back. Then came the killing. One of her warriors slipped in the snow, and the mammoth jerked to the side, stamping down with one mighty foreleg. The man's scream was cut off as he was crushed to gory red paste beneath its massive foot, spreading across the white snow. The other hunters backed off, chest heaving, looking for an opening to strike again. The mammoth swung its lethal tusk from side to side, turning on the spot and backing towards the edge of the cliff. Sejuani moved left, keeping the head of her flail in motion. Urkat circled right, sword held high at his shoulder. Sejuani resisted turning her head as she heard Olaf's irritating battle cry. Charge head first at the mammoth, his axe flashing silver in the waning light. The beast lowered its head, tusk ready for the berserker to death. Olaf was deep in blood mist, a state of mind that turned him into a ferocious killing machine, a living avatar of death. The mammoth swung its head up, and Olaf leapt into the air, ripped one of its slashing trunks with his free hand. Using the momentum of the beast's movement, he swung up and over its head to land on the mammoth's shaggy back. His axe hacked down like a woodsman chopping a stubborn tree root. The mammoth reared up, shaking its body to dislodge the berserker. But Olaf had ridden wilder monsters than this. He gripped a handful of its long hair and laid a fury of blows upon the mammoth's back. Seeing his chance, Urkat charged towards the beast, sword raised to cut the exposed throat. Its trunk lashed around his waist like a tentacle of a boneless creature that sometimes washed up from the oceans on Gelduk's shores. The mammoths lifted Urkats into the air before slamming him down on gutted black rock. Sejuani heard his spine shatter even over his screams of agony. Twice more it smashed him against a rock before hurling him to the side. Urkat's bloody remains fell to the snow. Body shattered, his arms and legs hideously twisted. Sejuani screamed, sprinted toward Olaf, and continued to chop through the beast's thick hide to its spine. The beast's eyes were maddened with pain and fury, but still it saw her coming. It bellowed and thrust its tusk at Sejuani, almost too fast to avoid. Almost. Sejuani dropped to the snow and slid beneath the mammoth's belly on her back. Holding the half of Winter's Wrath with one hand, screamed as she took hold of the chained shard of true ice in her fists. The pain was unbearable, as if she'd thrust her hand deep into fire. She slammed the shard up into the mammoth's chest, turning her head from the flaring bursts of blue-white fire as she punched it up deep into its body. Sejuani slid out from underneath the mammoth and sprang to her. The chain of ice fell her numbed arm. Her fingers were black and clawed frostbite. The mammoth staggered, its mighty heart freezing in its chest, blood in its veins to ice. Its eyes mist with the white of a lizard, and it staggered like a drunk as it fought to stay upright. "Olaf, get off!" yelled Sejuani. "Olaf!" Voice was hard and commanding, a voice to be obeyed. It penetrated the blood myth, weathering Olaf's mind, and he vaulted from the mammoth's back. He landed next to her, chest heaving, eyes wide, and his axe blade soaked in blood. Sejuani wanted to speak, but the pain was too great. That was good, she hoped. It meant the hand wasn't beyond saving. fingers throbbed in agony, and she thrust them deep within her furs, her best to hide the pain. The mammoth staggered and swayed, dragging its back leg as its bloody grew ever more sluggish, and her hunters closed in, spears poised, but Sejuani halted them. Word. The hunt was over. The beast had its back to the cliff, nowhere to go. Though the mammoth knew, it lifted its head proudly in defiance. It had fought to the last, and Sejuani held her weapon high, honoring its spirit. The great beast stared her down, caring nothing for the gesture. Instead, it stepped back over the cliff. Sejuani ran to the cliff's edge, sank to her knees, watching as the mammoth fell thousands of feet down the mountain before landing on a wide expanse of heavy snow. Savag! Swore Sejuani, balling her fists into the snow, heedless of the pain. Olaf stood over her, leaning dangerously far out over the cliff's edge. Ah, we'll just climb down and carve it up, he said with a shrug. The beast saved us the bother of dragging its carcass off the mountain. Sejuani sighed, about to agree with him, when she heard a distant cracking sound, the sound Babe's arms were taught to recognize. The sound of breaking ice. A network of angular black lines spread out from where the mammoth had landed. Sejuani realized the wide expanse of white wasn't a stretch of a tundra at all. The frozen surface of a mountain tarn. A lake pool formed in deep snow. The ice splintered in jagged segments as Sejuani watched with a sick sense of horrified inevitability as the mammoth's body slid beneath frigid black waters, far beyond their reach. Defying all Sejuani's understanding of the human body, Urkath yet lived. His ribs were smashed, and his spine was splintered into fragments. He still drew breath as Sejuani and Olaf squatted next to him. Incredibly, he'd managed to prop himself up against the very rock that had destroyed his spine, drawing short, hiked breaths. Calls me home, he said with a pained voice little more than a whisper. Lamb would never think to come for you, Urkath, said Sejuani, taking his hand. We are the Winter's Claw. Do not go meekly into dawn. Urkath nodded. My sword. Olaf pressed Urkath's weapon up to his palm and closed the man's fingers around its grip. The tale of your death will be told at the hearth fires for many seasons, said the berserker, a melodical edge in his voice. I envy you that. I truly envy you. Urkath coughed a mouthful of blood and said, I'd gladly swap fates with you, man. No, said Olaf. I do not think that you would want my faith. Yours is a fitting for a Urkath turned his head, the light fading from his eyes, and said, The gods, they show me fine sight as I die. Sejuani followed his gaze to the top of the mountain, where a vivid boreals of crimson and ember had driven away the lightning, a swath of light painting the night sky as a beautiful and a magical sight, as it was strange. He saw Urkath's bloodied stained mast lying in the snow, and slid it over his lifeless face. Wolf will be here soon, said Sejuani. Give the old bastard a scare for me. They left Urkat's body there, at the border between the realm of the mortals and the lost ones. His body belonged to the Freljord now, and his spirit would roam the frozen winds until the cold, atavistic soul of the land found a use for it. Their mood was grim as they descended the mountain. To stay on the hunt any longer would be pointless. As it was, they had only scraps to sustain back to the Winter's Claw encampment. 2 days' travel westward. Exhausted, and with hunger gnawing at their belly, Sejuani swayed at Bristol's saddle, her frozen hand tingling spurs. Olaf kept pace on foot, keeping his own counsel. His mood was dark. Night crossed over the horizon, and as they reached the foot of the mountains and camped in the lee of the titanic Milhir. It had once been part of a great stone circle higher up the mountain. It had toppled a long ago earthquake. The smooth stone surface was carved with ancient symbols no one could read, and a pair of frozen skeletons laid in twine as its far end, a frosted blade lying within their bones. Lovers, bitter enemies, who could say? Dawn brought fresh snows and colder winds coming from the high peaks, as though the mountain itself sought to drive them off its slopes. Their route home took them past the remains of a village that had once stood where the road turned mountain pass. Its structures were ghostly tombs now, its inhabitants long dead or long gone. Nightfall on the second day saw them come within sight of the Winter's Claw encampment. A few guttering torches marked its edge, and Sejuani's heart sank to see how few there are now. Not so very long ago, when she had first marshaled her followers, she numbered in the thousands, but hunger and the harshest of the recent seasons had forced her to scatter the hosts. "How do you fare?" asked Olaf, as they trudged towards the beacons of light, the first words he had said since coming off the mountain. "At last he speaks," said Sejuani, irritated at his sulkiness. "Ah, don't mind me," said Olaf. "Each time the blood mist takes me, I hope it will be the last time, that I will die in glory. And every time it fades, I am sad that I am one step closer, dying in peace. I do not wish to have that fate." Sejuani shrugged. "Have no fear, Olaf. With enemies all around us, I promise you the days of blood and battle, night, death, and fury." Olaf grinned. His grim consonant vanished like snow before the summer. "Swear it." "I swear it," promised Sejuani. But to your answer, your first question, Vilhelmir will take it as an ill omen that the tribe's leader returns with nothing to show for her hunt. "A pox of his kind," spat Olaf. "Seers only ever speak in riddles and deliver naught but grim portents. I'd sooner trust a southerner." Sensing an opening, Sejuani asked, "Are you ever going to tell me why you went south?" "No," said the berserker. "I do not think I will. Some tales are left best within the pass." Sejuani ran the stiff brush through Bristol's fur, letting the anger burning her after meeting at the tent longhouse flow from her every hard sweep. As she feared, the seer, Vilhelmir, had found great woe in her having returned without meat for curing. Circling the fire pit, his cloak of raven feathers glistening in the orange light of flames. He told the assembled claw leaders that the coming winter would be the grimmest of any of them had known. Olaf had openly mocked the man, telling him a child could say the same thing. The other hunting claws had met with little more success, so Lex Claw had taken 6 Elnuk from the Avarosan drover, waited too long to lead his herd to pastures. The Hefnar's group had found and killed small pod and horned seals trapped on land after the ocean flows had frozen to the edge of the land. It wasn't nearly enough, but it could keep the tribe's bellies full for only days. Enough. Fear made the tribe's blood run hot, and shouting voices clamored to know what she could do. Now and how she planned to keep her people alive until the spring musters. Sejuani had no answer. The angry voices echoed long into the night with ill-formed thoughts as on how they should survive the rest of their weeks. Some said they should march south, Orncal's rocks, and make peace with the Avarosans, but they were quickly shouted down by Gunak, the most bellicose of the Sejuani's war leaders. Beating his tattooed chest with his axe, he demanded they take their claws and carve a red path as deep as they could Avarosan lands to earn a glorious death. Sejuani had to admit, despite its suicidal futility, the idea of riding into the southern lowlands with blades unsieged greatly appealed her. Others said they should try another hunt. After all, wasn't there still light and food enough to mount one more expedition? Heads nodded at the suggestion until hunt leader Varuki explained there was barely enough food to sustain the hunters, and that everyone would be frozen and starve before they return. Quieter speakers said maybe they should disperse the tribe, each family making their own way into the wilds. Smaller groups would be easier to feed after all, yet alone survive. Sejuani had quashed such talk straight away. She knew it was going to be hard enough to get the full tribe back together in the spring months as it was. Breaking up even further would only tempt each smaller group to turn from the Winter's Claw, try and forge a new life in the south. The Freljord within the land's community was life, and to separate further was to die. No one could endure alone, and only by the combined will of the tribe, even one as harsh and unforgiving as the Winter's Claw, survival was possible. Besides, going south meant a life lived as a prisoner on the fields, of homes built from stone, of tedding flocks. That was not the Winter's Claw way, and would never be their way. Sejuani would rather die with the blood running hot in her veins, and a blade in her hand had stopped a worn down by years of grubbing at the dirt for seeds. In the end, Villemir had marched straight up to her, a brazen threat to her authority. How were to the Winter's Claw to survive? Once she would have struck him down with such of a defiance, but his question was fair, and everyone gathered in the tent knew it. Her people needed a leader who could make life and death decisions without fear. So, she told the assembled leaders they would have an answer when dawn light break claws over the mountain. now brushing the thick hair running down Bristol's back. She felt the raging storm within her mind finally calming. Grooming the giant beast's back soothed Sechwani's emotions, reminding her of a much simpler time, though part of her knew that life had never been simple, at least not really. She thought back to when she'd brought Ash to the Winter's Claw, finding her alone and in exile on the ice. She smiled, remembering how her childhood friend had mistaken Sechwani for one of the Ursine. Her strokes grew harder and harder as she thought of how Ash had betrayed the Winter's Claw and turned her back on Sechwani during the raid on the Abertail. That was the moment Sechwani had known for sure there was no chance for the Winter's Claw to ever make peace with the Avarosans. Bristol grunted in annoyance, stamping its hooves in irritation. "Careful, lass. The beast is getting unsettled," said a voice from behind. Sechwani spun, reaching for the knife in her hip. A shape lay at the corner of the coral, small and useless looking like of a bundle rags. She released the grip of her knife, shocked to see who had spoken. Lying in a makeshift bed of straw was a wretched old man who should have been left out on the ice to die many years ago. His legs were nothing more than stumps that ended just above the knee, and his slightness eyes were molten with white like a gold egg. His name was Creek, and he'd had once seen the Algovaden tribe's farmers and builders who used to call Sechwani's banner. So, she had sent Urkat's Warclaw to wipe them out and take their herds, their furs, their iron, and their salt. The survivors fled up the slopes of the mountain, summit seethed with the red rock that flows. When Earthcath returned, it was with Creek on his back. He seemed confused when Sechwani demanded to know why he'd brought them a useless mouth to feed. Urkath claimed that the Ursine had driven them from the mountain, speaking of a blade-pierced titan draped in bloodied fur and horns, gaping skulls, and fists that hurled fire. He simply said that the mountains had told him to bring the blind man him, before dumping him unceremoniously at the edge of the village. Sechwani had given the orders that no one feed the seer, that he left behind for the sake of the Freljord to take. But here he was, many months and leagues from the battle, alive and more confusingly somehow with the Winter's Claw. Word, as you glimpsed the realms of the lost ones on the mountain, said Creek. I do not envy you that. I saw them once, back when you drove us Earth's home. Sechwani put aside her irritation long enough to say, You didn't see anything. You're blind. Creek nodded and said, Oh, I seen them. Better than any true-shotted archer ever did. White and gold in the clouds, lightning for blood, and voices of thunder. I saw. I did. Sechwani peered to the milky whiteness of his gaze. Those eyes haven't seen anything in many a year. True, said Creek. World went white for me on my 10th winter, but some things are best without eyes, lass. Sechwani tapped the flat blade against Creek's neck and said, "Call me lass again, and I'll slit this in your throat right now." "Ah, yes, that's right. You're no lass. You're War Mother, aren't you? You remember the next time some seer tries to tell you what to do," laughed Creek, waving a filthy gnaw hand at her. "But listen, you know warriors who lose a hand or leg swear they can still feel the cold in them. Same for my eyes. Now I see more than ever did before, more than ever I've ever wished to see. Things you gouged your own eyes out with a knife, if ye saw half of them." "Not know things I have seen," said Szechuan. "That's right," said Creek, leaning in, said, "Ever since that night you and your spirit walker made offerings to the lost ones, sang the oats, you burned the wood in the death knot, and offered up the weapons and bone. So what do you see? Days of blood and battle, nights of death and fury." Just thinking about the slaughter at the city by the river filled Sejuani with a hunger for raw meat, a thirst for marrow sucked from splintered bone. She shook her head again to free of the sensation, and said, "How are you alive? I told my people not to feed you, to leave you behind." "Old Orn fed me," said Creek, "at Hearth Home, just before your killers came out from the smoke. Lifted me up like a babe, and nourished me with a mouthful of broth from his great cauldron. That I did, yes." Sejuani sighed. Creek was clearly mad, but she was more irritated that someone in the Winter's Claw had clearly been feeding this old fool, but her own going hungry. She went to rise, but the old man's hand shot out into her wrist in a powerful grip. "On my honor, not a scrap of food had passed my lips since your dead man brought me down the mountain," said Creek, with his lifelessness and wide eyes boring right into hers, as though something else started out from behind them. Something indefinitely older and wiser. "Never took no food, nor water, neither. Orn's great cauldron seen to that. No company that sums from it ever leaves unsatisfied. One mouthful, and your belly don't growl for a whole turn of the seasons." "Orn's cauldron?" scoffed Sejuani. "That's just a legend. Wishful thinking. It's one of the lost tales to tell children around petty little campfires." "And where'd you think them tales come from but truth?" snapped Creek, lifting the furs covering his body. "This look like wishful thinking to you?" Sejuani let out a voluntary gasp at the sight of Creek's torso, his flesh ruddy and pink, his belly full and soft with fat. Sejuani was ivory pale, her wrists too slender. The flesh pulled tight over her frame, pressing against the bones for want of meat, fat, and fish. "How?" said Sejuani. "I told ya," said Creek. "The great cauldron of Orn. Lost one stole it from Hearth Home for spite's sake. Said Orn was too soft on mortals, that if they could fill their bellies any time they wanted, they'd get spoiled and weak. So they killed his followers and took it to their mountains, high up where power now paints the sky with blood-red light. Orin's crafty, ye see. His magic's too weirded cunning to stay hidden forever. Even the lost ones can't keep power like that out of sight. Ask that spirit walker friend of yours if he still remembers his man. He'll hear the truth of what I say. Sejuani shook her head. Udyr's gone. He walked into the blizzard. Said he needed the time away from the spirits looking get inside him. Said he needed to find a way to strengthen his will. Then it's all on you, War Mother, said Creek. What's it to be? The old ways, frozen on your knees, or blood-soaking, warm southern soil? Or maybe try and take back what the lost ones stole. You've faced them before, have you? So what's more of a time, huh? Why not face them? Old man's story was lunacy, wasn't it? How could she possibly convince her people to march into the mountain realm of the Ursine on the word of a madman? The Freljord was a place of dark mystery, where legends walked the ice, and its magic was there in every breath. Some whispered that Ash had fought her way to the legendary bow Avarosa, and Sejuani's own iceborne powers were that magic was woven into the very fabric of the landscape. But still, why would you help me? Asked Sejuani. My warriors slew your tribe. Don't you understand yet, War Mother? Said Creek, the timbre in his voice deepening, becoming low, sardonic. We are all one tribe, and it is long past time you understood that. You think too small, like a fighter only seeing the foe in front of them. You must think like a war mother, like a queen. There is a season for fighting, a season for leading, and one season for dying. But that time is coming when the sons and daughters of the Freljord must stand together, or you will die all alone, one by one. And the first step on that road in staying alive is to stay alive. Tell me, here, daughter of Kalkia, tell me. Bonnie nodded and said, I hear you. Sejuani left Creek and Bristol at the Coral. First light was breaking over the mountains, and she paused to savor the coming new day. The orange glow of the dying hearth fire was visible within the tented longhouse, where her people waited to hear what she had to decide. Olaf squatted by its entrance, running a glittering whetstone over the blade of one of the enormous axes. He looked up, his eyes narrowed toward. You have the look of someone chewed at a nettle, he said. I know what we have to do. No one's gonna like it. Olaf shrugged it off. They don't need like it. Your war mother. That's what you. You tell them what to do, and they'll do it. That's how it works. That's how all things here works. I'll want you by my side, said Sejuani. Olaf rose to his full towering height, hooking his axe over his shoulder. No, said Sejuani. Blades out. Olaf nodded and slowly said, Are you going to tell me your plan before we go in? Remember how I promised you days of blood and battle, nights of death and fury? Aye, War Mother, I do. Olaf, smile widens as the horizon does. We're going back up the mountain, said Sejuani, to the realm of the Ursine, to steal the great cauldron of Orn from the Volibear. Right. They're not going to like it, said Olaf. But I like it.